I hope you enjoyed the little intro jingle by Walter ETC, and for YouTube, video produced by artist Kevin Gilmore. Anyways, let's get at it. At the beginning of this year, I had the absolute pleasure to wax poetics with Educator, record producer, author, and executive director of the famed San Francisco based Blue Bear School of Music, Dr. Stephen Savage. During our almost hour discussion, we touch upon the humble beginnings of the Blue Bear School of Music, in which celebrated its 50-year anniversary last year. Additionally, we dive into the importance of music education of use within an urban setting, higher level societal topics, along with a few famous name drops. So please enjoy this very pleasant and heady conversation. RL.
Okay. Got it.
Okay, Mr. Savage. Where were we? I asked, I believe, if you resided in the West Coast most of your life.
And I was saying, I was born and raised in Southern California, and I did spend a year at Oberlin College in Ohio, which was the farthest east I had been at the time. And then, and from there, I spent a summer in Boston, which was great, and on and off in New York, but lived here in Santa Cruz for a little while, then in Palo Alto for a little while, and then in San Francisco for many, many years. And now I'm in the East Bay.
Now, when was it? Did you always know you were going into music, or did you always have that passion for music, and you just like, I'm going to study music and etc.?
Not always. I started when I was 13. Banjo was my first instrument, and interestingly, Mike Stewart, who very few people probably know, but he was the founder of the band We Five, which was a one-hit wonder back in the 60s. You Were on My Mind. He was my banjo teacher, but I didn't really get bit until I was 17, and I started playing the drums, and I fell in love with Dylan and the Beatles and a lot of the 60s music. And at that point, it was clear to me that that was my passion, and it has been ever since then. It's been my life.
Now, sorry, I'm trying to create questions on the fly. Sorry, but which is the kind of point of the series, I guess. Just casual conversations. What was like the scene out there, like growing up, and then now, and like how can you kind of compare like the scene then musically and culturally comparatively to now? Because I'm not too familiar with like, the West Coast, maybe some LA stuff, but maybe that's just more legend and myth.
Right. Well, I was very fortunate to be able to be a hippie in the 60s. I was a little bit on the young side, but I was old enough to have seen Jimi Hendrix at Winterland with the original band, and a lot of great 60s bands, some great 60s bands that I missed and I wish I'd seen, but I saw the Dead, Airplane, and Quicksilver New Year's Eve show in '67 at the Fillmore. And so, I mean, it was a crazy time, and it was a cultural revolution, the counterculture, and it was transformative. And for those of us, it coincided with coming of age for me, and it was a phenomenal experience, mostly positive, but partially negative in some ways. And then I was fortunate enough to sort of be on the other end in 78, 79, and 80 of the punk scene. I was a little old for the punk scene, but I had a band that actually did well and ended up getting very involved in that scene. And we got to play the Def Club and the Temple and a bunch of the early punk clubs with the Kennedys and with X. And actually that's when I became a manager and a record producer, and I was working with a woman, Bonnie Hayes, that we started a punk band together that played all those clubs, and then I ended up being her manager and her producer, and we got signed to Slash Records, and that was another incredible time. And in both those times, music was such a bigger part of the culture. It was so integrated into the culture. and it was so important to the culture. Music is still really important, and to a lot of people, music is still everything. But there's a lot of competing media and um, activities, and MTV, which came a little later, really changed the whole music landscape, where video and pictures became an integral part of what people expected from music, and then of course video games and the internet and on and on and on.
Oh yeah, that's what is kind of inquiring. It's like I've noticed some, every decade there's been some major musical movements up until, more recently, where it's harder to tell if there has been this cultural movement musically. Obviously, things are more funneled now and niche because of the internet, and anybody can really self-produce any sounds. And if you have a fan base, it's just strictly more like a linear funneled fan base comparatively to
Right.
etc.
Yeah, I've wondered and been very curious about that same thing, because rap and hip hop is 40 years old now, and that was the last really major musical movement, I think. And now, like you say, exactly what you said, it's become so niche, and you have a million things. You have the string quartet that plays heavy metal, and you have every different combination of things that is happening, which is cool, and it's a lot of the most interesting stuff. But in terms of any kind of, when will there ever be really a new genre of the kind of importance of jazz, rock and roll, rap, these things which were so enormous. Um, we haven't seen that in the last 40 years, as far as I can tell, and I don't know if I'll ever see it again.
Mm. Well, I feel like we are waiting for this this I guess unifying glue. I feel like I've spoken to numerous artists as well, visual, musical. I feel like the pandemic has been this glue binding, or forcing people, like the musicians I've spoken to in the city, they've had a busk, even like musicians that, in at the Met, have to just I've met had to collaborate, cross collaboration with different musicians, carry their gear on the subway. It's kind of been like more of like, a pop-up kind of culture in the city, at least what I've been finding out due to the
Yeah,
pandemic. I think
yeah.
that's why we're lacking, these previous years prior to the pandemic, this unifying glue, this movement, this angst, this collective angst of humanity, I guess. But
Yeah, well,
I,
that's
I could be
that's really
wrong, but
interesting. Well, I wonder. I do think the pandemic has had an enormous effect on musicians, and really a very negative, obvious effect as the gigs ended and have ended and are very slow to return. And so I think musicians, and I'm very involved in this music school, had to completely pivot to find a way to survive, and what you're talking about, which maybe is a unifying and a kind of cultural moment of significance for musicians, maybe it is going to create something more powerful and something new. I don't know that I'm seeing it yet, but I mean, we're still in the pandemic, so I don't,
yeah, yeah.
um, it would be great if I think certainly a lot of great music, a lot of great art will emerge from this period.
Mm.
And how unifying it'll be, I don't know, but maybe that would be great.
That's true. Well, I mean, like when you're in the present moment, it's hard to tell, what will come out of this period because we're still in this period. And
Exactly,
I can't
exactly.
jump forward as a historian and kind of look at the archives of musical archives of visual records. Can't do it.
Right.
It's impossible yet. I
It
mean,
is. It's being written right now.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's hard to kind of do that futuristic outlook, which I always like to ask. Though it's a fun kind of
Yeah.
thought exercise, I would say. But let's, I guess then let's wrap back to the Blue Bear School itself. Like, when did
Yep.
you really? When and why did you you want to co-create the school in the first place, and what really got you engaged in the education component?
Yeah, it was an interesting time. And I mean, I was in 71, I was 23 years old, and I got called. I was playing in a band. This one, I was living for a year or so at Stanford. I wasn't going to Stanford, but I was actually playing in a band with all Stanford students and playing frat parties and stuff. And it was, for me, that was the beginning of my professional career where I was actually making a living as a musician, but it was playing covers. And so one of the acquaintances from Stanford called me and said he had a band that needed a drummer, and it was an original material band. It was with his older brother, and they were also starting a music school. And at that time, they had not really started the school, they were just talking about it. And so I moved to the city and I joined the band, and we started the school, but the school was really just the idea was while the band um, evolves and improves and gets to a point where it can ideally get a record contract, and we would move forward. That was the primary interest, was the band, and making it, being successful as a band. And the school was like, okay, we need to make some money, and we were all into teaching, and so we decided to start the school. And 2 years later, and we had some pretty big shows. We got a manager, Ed Denson, who had been Country Joe and the Fish's manager, and then he was Joy of Cooking's manager, and then he was our manager. But it didn't work. We had some opportunities. We never were able to get a deal, and over a 2.5 year period, got more and more frustrated. Especially Steve, who was the band leader, and the band broke up, and the school was like, well, it's still here, and it's like kind of a cool thing. And so we kept doing the school. A few of us kept doing the school, and over a period of time, well, and then about 5 years later, in 78, after the band broke up, I heard about Fort Mason Center, which was this new urban park. It was really a new model for an urban park in Fort Mason, which was a big military base that had these huge warehouses for storing whatever, tanks and bombs and stuff in. But it wasn't used anymore, so they had given that, the Army gave it to the Park Service. And the National Park Service said, okay, we're going to make an urban park, and we're going to just move nonprofits into these old warehouses. And it was just starting. And I wish I remember who told me about it, because I don't remember. But I went out there, and they said, "Oh, rock and roll school, sure." So at that time, we had 60 students, and we were a couple $1,000s in debt, which at the time seemed like a huge amount of money. And but we moved to Fort Mason, and that really was the transformation of the school. And we just grew and grew from there. We're over 800 students and 40 teachers, and 50 years later,
Wow.
well, 40 years later from when we moved to Fort Mason. But
And
so
you're a nonprofit, correct?
We're a nonprofit. We've been a nonprofit from the beginning. We do a lot of outreach to underserved communities, a lot of free programs. We do a lot of fundraising, but we're sort of an unusual nonprofit in that our 70% of our income is earned income. It's from tuition. So we have regular classes for regular people that pay a regular amount of money, and and then we have 30% of our income, which they call it contributed, which is donations. But as I like to say, I think we work harder for the contributed money than we do for the earned money, because it's writing grants and cultivating relationships and doing an annual campaign, etc. So the school is about $1.8 million business at this point, and 50 years old, which is really pretty exciting.
Wow, that's amazing. Sorry, I just went blank.
Yeah.
I It sounds kind of like more of a B Corp, but I don't want to, or is that correct? Or would I be more correct on that? Or is it more of a nonprofit? Or actually, that's
More,
not even, I don't know if this is an engaging question to any listener. It's engaging to me, but it might get too technical in the business side of things.
what's the question?
Oh, would you consider it more of like a B Corp or just a strict nonprofit?
It's a strict 501c3 nonprofit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's an arts nonprofit. And actually, we're sort of a hybrid school and social service agency because of all the stuff we do in the outreach stuff is really social service kind of work. And then we're a school for more like a regular arts school. But yeah, it's all a nonprofit.
Now, was there a specific methodology that you based the model off of the school, or like I'm not too familiar with musical education, so I don't know if there's specific models of teaching that you built the school off of or not.
Right. We built our school off the hippie model, which is to say, whatever works is what we were doing. And at the time, nobody was teaching rock and roll. Nobody was thinking about teaching rock and roll. A lot of people at the time would have said, "Oh, you can't teach rock and roll,"
Yeah.
So we have really had a pretty open philosophy, and we've had a lot of great teachers, including some relatively famous teachers. Bill Spooner, who was the band leader of the Tubes, taught at the school for like 10 years, and was awesome. He taught we have all these workshop bands, which are like garage bands with a teacher. And it's like these bands had one of the great band leaders of all time teaching them, a bunch of amateur musicians. But he and everybody basically did it and do it however works for them.
Mm.
And we do, at this point, we're a fairly mature organization, and we gauge our teachers basically based on retention. If the teachers are keeping their students and people are signing up for their workshops and their classes, then they're a great teacher. And if they're losing students a lot and people aren't signing up for their classes, then we stop giving them students and stop giving them classes.
Mm.
So it's very, very ad hoc, wide open.
Now, how I guess it's a kind of logical question. How have you had to adapt class-wise, like with COVID and stuff? Has everything been strictly via online Zoom stuff, or?
Mostly, yeah. The first 2 weeks after the COVID hit and our campus got shut down at Fort Mason, everything had to pivot to online. And we were basically an all in-person program. So we have a great staff. I'm so grateful for the staff. Everybody was working, I think, 80-hour weeks and setting up Zoom classes and contacting and educating the teachers about how to teach on Zoom. And, a fair number of the programs just died right there. Like the band program, that was over at that moment. And for the most part, classes, private lessons are the thing that work pretty well on Zoom. And still not as good as in person, but yeah. So all of the private lessons pivoted to Zoom. We have a really pretty large, vibrant toddler program for like 4-month to 5-year-olds. Music programs have been going on for quite a while, which are wonderful. And those ended too because none of you couldn't. Well, we tried to do them on Zoom, but I mean, you can't really engage a 2-year-old over Zoom.
Yeah.
But so after a couple of months, our Little Bears director had this idea of like, okay, let's start doing them in the park. Let's start doing them outside. Nobody's coming inside, but people will go outside, and you can do social distancing. And so we'd had like 24 Little Bears classes, and we were down to 2 Little Bears classes, and then we started running them in the park, and like 2 months later we were back to 24 Little Bears classes. So that was really good for us, helping us get through get through the pandemic, get away from Zoom. We did open the campus again in September, just this last September, and now with the Omicron and the pandemic is continuing, not many people are coming in person, mostly still Zoom lessons, park Little Bears classes. We are doing bands again, and people are so desperate to come back and play in person, so the band program is happening. Um, but it's been difficult. We got, I don't know if you know, if you're a small business, there was PPP loan money, which happened. We got 2 rounds of PPP loan money that really helped us out. Some of our funders, some of our bigger funders, a couple of our bigger funders, without me even having to contact them, just contacted us and said, "We're giving you more money because we know this is a hard time, it's a difficult time."
Yeah.
So we're actually we're in good shape, considering. It's crazy.
Well, I guess a question of mine, and what I've noticed, in the States too, is that the cutting of funding for the arts and in public education, and
Yeah.
how do you continue or advocate for the importance of music education on your and raise funding for that, because
Yeah.
in these days it's more just make profit tech, et cetera, et cetera. Schools are cutting back the arts, visual, music, et cetera. And I my point of view is the arts really are very important for one's mind to dive into, but
Absolutely. And it's tragic and criminal what is happening, really. And it's been true in America really for a long time. If you go to Europe, and there's so much more government support for the arts than there ever has been here, which really sucks, but it's less than ever now. So we have a lot of literature, and there's been a lot of research about how music is so good for people and for kids, and not only, although for us it's all about playing music, but it really increases their ability for all cognitive functions. It increases their academic ability, to makes them better at math, at science, all of this stuff. Clearly playing music is really good for kids, for their education, for academically. So we make all those arguments, but and we have gotten very involved with the San Francisco Unified School District, and so there is at least 2 people that are in charge of the arts programming at SF Unified, and we become very close to them, and we provide a lot of programming for them, but they have a very limited budget, of course. So we do both in school and after school. We do rock bands with them. We do guitar classes. We do the stuff the kids really want to do, but it's fairly limited amount because of budget. A couple of years ago, this guy, Jay Rosenstein, who was just a guy who made a lot of money, distributed a bunch of money to programs. So at that time, we got $100,000 to do programming at San Francisco Unified. So, we do some programming there that we pay for out of the money that we've raised, some programming that they pay for out of their very small arts budget. But like I said, it's so sad that there's not more of that, but we're certainly doing everything we can, as much as we can.
I feel like there needs to be arts and culture lobbyists in Congress, like, but we're not the cultural organizations aren't backed by billions of dollars like other industries.
It's true. I was very involved with the Recording Academy, which are the Grammy people. At one time, I was a national trustee, and they do have a lobbyist in Washington.
Oh.
But they have one lobbyist, and they can do a little bit. But and the Recording Academy has a lot of money from the Grammy broadcast, but still, compared to, say, the oil industry or the auto industry, or those lobbyists, we can't compete.
Yeah. Well, how have I guess I had something on this. Sorry, my mind's just
that's all right. Yep.
How has the reception been, though? I guess with your students, I guess, or the feedback from I guess the students and the have they gained something valuable from their experiences with the school, and have you seen anybody take what they've learned and really expand it outside into and take it to the next level, I guess?
Yes. So we our school is primarily, really overwhelmingly amateurs,
Mm,
and that has always been our focus. You know, we toyed at times with ideas of becoming accredited, or looking at the Berkeley College model in Boston. You're
mm,
from Boston, you're certainly familiar with, and that's just not our mission. Our mission is amateur musicians and outreach to kids programming. And so, you know, we've had a few people come through the school that have gone on to do, you know, the bass player from Third Eye Blind came from the school. And early on, the Hayes family were very involved in the school. And Chris Hayes was the guitar player and one of the main writers, and Huey Lewis and Bonnie Hayes has written songs for Bonnie Raitt, and Kevin Hayes was a drummer for Robert Cray. So we've had some connections to higher level professional musicians, and those are great, and those have been helpful. In some ways, I'm more proud of. We've had some students in the Bayview, which is let's see, I guess that would be the equivalent of, actually, I'm forgetting the name of the neighborhood in Boston, but you know, one of the really underserved communities where the kids are really at risk.
mm.
And we've had a few of those kids come through the program and just become um, uh, not only proficient, but super responsible, super into it. And we've ended up being able to hire them to teach for us and sort of put them on a path, a music related career path
Wow.
as teachers and maybe ultimately as musicians. And that's really gratifying. Um, so
Mm.
that's been more the focus for the school. We recognize the power of celebrity, but it's just not our focus.
Well, I get that because, oh, actually, we're seeing this now, I guess, in the trends or in statistics here in the city, at least, or y- due to the pandemic, we've seen a spike in crime, but
Yes.
also, due to a lot of after school programs or programs such as yourself on the West Coast,
Yeah.
without, you have young men, young persons without anything to do. So, it's
Yeah.
in this built up angst due to the pandemic that leads
Yeah.
to the higher crimes. But with programs
Yeah.
such as yours and other nonprofit arts programs, it's that keeps kids really engaged with something, and particularly if they don't learn, like, or aren't engaged with math or science, or
Yeah.
that's why I think programs like yours and the arts in general should be highly incorporated in the public education.
Absolutely. And
Not everybody
unfortunately,
thinks or learns like or is
exactly.
engaged
And
with that linear type of thought.
absolutely. And the academic school path is not the right path for many people. And we don't do a good job with that. Unfortunately, um, unfortunately, in the beginning of the pandemic, well, at first the schools were shut down, the after school programs were shut down, the community centers were shut down. So for a considerable period of time, our outreach programs were really non-existent again
Mm,
because nobody was running those programs.
mm.
Thank goodness this year, now the schools are going again and the community centers are open and those programs are booming. And I think there's tremendous interest from the kids to be doing arts and to be playing music because partly out of frustration and anxiety as a result of this time of being shut down.
Mm.
It's interesting. I mean, I don't. Nobody knows what is right or what the right thing to do was. You know, they're keeping the schools open now, even though the pandemic is worse than it was when they shut the schools down,
Yeah, yeah.
because they realized that, man, the kids have to have that. It was this was a disastrous year for so many of the kids.
Oh yeah, no, I can't imagine how many kids have maybe fallen behind. Uh,
Yes.
the regular course load due to this. And I
Absolutely.
would have, because I always struggle in the traditional sense with, the traditional education, because I have a bit of a LD, but I excel in the visual arts. I
Right.
excel, and
Exactly. So
it's taken me years to figure this one out. But so
because it's not really fostered. It's not fostered very well, is the thing, and that's, I think about, for me, my commitment to being a musician, and there was really nothing that supported that, especially to be a rock and roll musician in the '60s and '70s. But now, and Blue Bear, it's like I often say, if only there had been a Blue Bear when I was a teenager, because at least for some kids, we can provide a sense of belonging and help and encouragement and opportunity, and it's just critically important and valuable.
now, are you strictly rock and roll, or do you teach other genres as well?
We do. I mean, we are strictly popular music. We don't do any classical music really, but it's especially doing all the outreach programming. We do a lot of rap and hip hop, a lot of making beats kind of classes, and DJ classes and electronic music classes, because that's in those communities, that's where there's greater interest. And then we do a small amount of jazz. We've never been that oriented toward jazz, but we do some jazz programs, some jazz workshops, and then we do within popular music, rock and roll, blues, country, R&B. We do all of that. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I'm sure I would probably need a lesson or two. I only have a hand drum and some maracas. That's where my musical talent lies.
Well, that's great. I mean, hand drums are awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've no set mindset. I just kind of go do. But
yeah, it's great. Well, and I was a drummer. I was a professional drummer. I play the piano now, although not very well. But drums aren't. Well, and set trap drums are not that much fun to play by yourself, and because I'm not playing in an ensemble, I'm enjoying piano more, and I'm taking piano lessons from a Blue Bear piano teacher, of course. But I've always said, and as a drummer, drums are much cheaper and maybe better than psychotherapy.
That's true. I've been through a bit of like art therapy, actually, and movement-based therapy, dance therapy, which I found dance is wonderful, just to let go of all that built-up anxiety, etc.
Absolutely. And of course, music and dance are joined at the hip. And our toddler programs, those are all movement and music based, because at that age, there's no real separation between those things.
Have you ever witnessed like somebody who maybe not a younger person who may have not had the musical background, but then picked up like an instrument or the skill really quick and was really engaged, and you could tell she could be kind of a savant a bit? Or
Absolutely. I mean, I've always been interested in that, and I personally, although my first love is rock and roll, and I fell in love with African music and every kind of music, I've also enjoyed classical music, and you especially see those kind of savants and child prodigies in classical music. Although, and I also got involved in the academic part of it in musicology, and in one of my classes, I'd talk about prodigies in popular music, and the most interesting ones. It's really interesting because their career paths were so different, but they both were incredible prodigies, and that would be Michael Jackson and Stevie Wonder, both sort of coming up at the same time. And it's difficult to be a prodigy, and I think Michael Jackson did not do a great job of being able to deal with it, and Stevie Wonder was able to deal with it. But I mean, I actually had back in the early Blue Bear, when I was teaching drums, one of my students who was 13 years old was Jay Lane, who was the drummer with the Wolf Brothers, and with Bob Weir, and with a bunch of Bob Weir bands. He actually just sat in for one of the Dead drummers and Dead and Company, when one of the Dead drum. So he's had a great successful career. And when he was 13, he was already a really good drummer. He was certainly my best student, and oddly, he was kind of a sullen 13-year-old, and I think it was just a teenager thing. He's this incredibly exuberant. We've gotten to be friends and now, incredibly exuberant, outgoing guy now. But talent. On the one hand, they say talent is love, and but that's not the whole story. Aretha Franklin, whatever, opened her mouth when she was 10 years old, and it was incredible, and she hadn't done anything yet.
Yeah.
And some people have a gift. Chris Hayes, who was the guitar player with Huey Lewis, who came to Blue Bear when he was 12 years old, and when he was 17, he was touring Europe in a jazz band, and he had an incredible gift. So nobody knows where that comes from, and it's really a gift to us, and it's often hard on the people who have that gift. Janis Joplin was another one who had that gift, and it was really difficult for her to navigate. So it's always been fascinating to me, but it's really not understood at all, I think.
Has there been a comprehensive research on the subject, or no? Or
Not that I know of, really, on what makes prodigies. Actually, I have a friend who's conducting research, trying to conduct research on music and the brain, actually on the emotional response to music. And he's a neurobiologist, so he has all these ways to measure brain waves and to see where they're coming from. And he's trying to figure out more, if we can know more about how music creates emotion. But very little is known about that. And, it's fascinating. Of course, we realize very little is known about the human brain in general. We know so little about it. It's so incredibly complex. And people say your brain is like a computer, but really, your brain is nothing like a computer. It's light years beyond computers, and music is too.
Well, we get that. We get that. It seems like we're only meant to learn so much about our natural environments and ourselves, and we're not meant to understand the more complex aspects of our universe and ourselves. Because what would happen if we did? Like, that would be the scary part.
It would be super scary, and it also, that takes you into the whole spiritual realm, because there's so much that we don't know or understand, and that maybe we recognize that never is going to be explained with logic or science. There's other stuff going on,
It's like, you could equate that to the Big Bang Theory, in which, or just what kicked off the formation of the universe. Something had to, that's the quandary, right?
It is, and really, you just walk outside at night or anytime and look up, and it is, if you give it much thought, it is overwhelming beyond, like you say, it's self-preservation that doesn't allow us to understand what's going on.
That's true. and look what we do with the knowledge we do have, and what we've done to globally, and not just just we in a general sense as a species, but just overconsumption, in our mechanisms to fuel our transports and use of natural resources have led to our current state in the global health. But
yes, and it gets into the mistaken notion that civilization has been a progression of progress, of getting better and doing better, which is clearly not the case. I mean, if you look at the Native American culture and their relationship to nature and to the planet and to spirituality and to life, they were clearly much more advanced than we are. We are not doing a good job.
Oh yes, I and look at the Aztecs and the Mayans and their architecture and their understanding of the stars and the cuts of the stone is just perfect. We can't even do that with machines.
Exactly, or with computers. No, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
It was a higher understanding. Certainly has been a higher understanding at other parts in history, and yeah, we're kind of royally fucking it up right now.
Well, tying back into music though, all those cultures are really well. I definitely the Native Americans are tied into, drum circles and music
Absolutely.
and spirituality. And I've been to a few drum circles, and oh, it's just spiritually awakening. It's just
Yeah,
you feel physically and emotionally just a better person. I guess your
yeah,
body feels better, your spirit, your
yeah.
soul. It's
And
music,
yeah,
the way
music.
to communicating and bind a community is just it's a
Yeah,
weird, strange phenomena, I guess.
it is. But music creates emotions and states of minds and states of being that nothing else can create.
Mm,
And it has been a part. It's interesting. Um, there's a temptation to think of music as like nature. Music is like trees and the natural world, but it's not really. It
mm,
is human creation, um, but it is somehow so fundamental to humanity and so impactful in ways that nothing else is. Um, so that's why we're grateful to have a life in music. I'm so grateful to have had my life in music.
mm.
Because it's such a tremendous benefit to humanity.
So, oh yeah, I could go on with that subject and that conversation for a while, but
Yeah,
50 years already.
yeah.
So where do you see the school evolving, say, in the next 50 year or next 50 years, or where what would your hopes be futureless uh,
Yeah.
for a futuristic kind of vision of the school and progression?
Yeah, well, for one thing, I just really hope for another 50 years for the school for sure, and we're trying to set ourselves up to do that. We
Mm,
have some young staffers. We have some 20-something staffers that are super engaged, and I'm looking to them to take us for the next 50 years. But our model, and this has been totally upended by the pandemic, unfortunately, but that's not going to last forever.
mm,
Our model is really geographic expansion. So I want to have a campus in the East Bay. I want to have a campus in the North Bay. We're having the possibility of a second campus in San Francisco. And that really is our model. Music education, in-person music education is very geographically driven. People
mm,
don't want to drive an hour for their music lessons or their bands or whatever. So, and we have, we rent a room in another part of San Francisco that we use for workshops, and that's, I think, the future of the school. Um, is geographic expansion. I don't really aspire to outside the Bay Area to
mm,
becoming a national thing. I think we are very much of a Bay Area phenomenon, and I'm happy with that. I think
mm,
that's right for us.
mm. Well, well, I find the best programs keep it hyper local or more impactful programs, because the community, these students you're trying to reach, and what direct impact that will make in your immediate community, comparatively trying
Exactly.
to expand globally or nationally. I would
Ex-
say, yeah.
exactly. Well, that's well put, because that is, I agree completely, and that is our that's what's right for us. That's our philosophy.
And I've myself, I've been kind of involved in a nonprofit arts organization and music and performance, they have all sorts of arts and culture in Long
Cool.
Island City, in the city. And what I've picked up was they're hyper local, just
Yeah.
like Queens, Long Island City,
Yeah.
and it's very impactful. Though I mean, it's to that local community, and
Yeah.
it wouldn't work if they try to expand, even to
Right.
Manhattan,
Right.
or
Right.
elsewhere. It's that hyper locality, knowing your community, that really makes that impact.
It does. I guess it's that cliche: think globally, act locally.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like, yeah, if everybody acted, locally in that level, then the globe, and on a global uh scale, I think you would see a drastic impact,
Yeah,
comparatively to, you know, our current
absolutely.
system. But
Absolutely.
well, sir, did I miss anything, or did I?
Well, my guess is we could talk for several hours, but
Yeah.
I have other things to get to, and I'm sure you do too. So it's been great to talk to you, and I really appreciate the opportunity, and I love what you're doing. Thank you for helping keep the arts alive and spreading the word. And so I thank you for having me.
And thank you for taking the time to discuss the school and also the higher level, subjects,
Exactly.
which we could certainly go on for hours. But
Yeah, no doubt.
I'll let you enjoy your, what is it? It's morning still there, correct?
It's still the morning here. Yeah, it's 10 to 11, and I'll get ready for my 11 o'clock Zoom.
Yeah, more Zoom.
I know,
uh,
unfortunately.
well, have a wonderful day, sir, and
You too.
I'll let you know when this come every we post this out. We release this every 2 weeks, so it should be,
Okay.
I have a queue of people, and we'll let you know when this comes out.
Please do, and we'll share it over our socials and on our website and all of that.
I do hope to make it out there someday.
Well, when
Yeah,
you do, come and visit us.
I do need some musical lessons myself.
Well, we'll at least give you a tour of the school. It's a super fun place.
Oh yes, oh yes. Well, enjoy your day, sir, and
Okay.
talk soon.
Okay, thanks, Robert.
Take care.